The great chamber was a monument to stillness, a place where the weight of ages had compressed the very air into a form of liquid silence. Crystalline spires, grown, not built, soared into a vaulted darkness where captured nebulae swirled in a slow, cosmic ballet, their light the only illumination. This was the sanctum of the consensus, the heart of an empire spanning 1,000 suns, and within its hallowed confines, High Kalen Vorn of the Signian Ascendancy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. It was the chill of uncertainty, a feeling his people, with their millennia of ordered dominance, had long forgotten. At the center of the chamber, a vast holographic sphere depicted the source of this disquiet, a single, unremarkable vessel. It was crude, asymmetrical, and bore no of the elegant energy signatures that denoted the vessels of the known great races. It was a human ship, and its presence in the Orion Traverse had fractured the placid unity of the galactic core. Vorn's ancient eyes, the color of a dying star, remained fixed on the image. His own form was a testament to Signian power, tall, slender, with scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, and a crest of regal filaments that subtly shifted with his thoughts. He, like his ancestors, had been bred for contemplation and command, to see the grand tapestry of destiny where others saw only threads. And in the primitive vessel before him, he saw a thread that was jarringly out of place, a stitch of coarse, unknown material in a silk masterpiece. He felt the gazes of the other representatives upon him, felt their impatience, their arrogance, their fear. He was the anchor of this council, the voice of reason forged in epochs of unflinching stability. Today, that voice felt thin. "It is an affront," a voice boomed, shattering the contemplative silence. The sound was like grinding stone, emanating from the gargantuan form of War Marshal Krog of the Gorak hegemony. Krog was a being of pure, intimidating physicality, a mountain of muscle, chitin, and primal fury, his species having carved their empire from the bones of their enemies. He gestured a massive, clawed hand at the hologram. "These humans have blundered into a strategic choke point of the consensus. Their technology is laughable, their energy readings are pathetic. They are like insects crawling upon the throne of the gods. We should crush them. A demonstration of our authority is long overdue." A dry, rasping counterpoint came from the floating crystalline prism that housed Archivist Zil of the Kelth. The Kelth were beings of pure data, their consciousnesses encoded in silicon lattices. They perceived the universe as a series of equations to be solved. Emotion is an inefficient variable, War Marshal. Crushing them yields no valuable data. Our long-range scans of their home system and its limited colonial outposts confirm your assessment of their technological infancy. They possess rudimentary kinetic weapons and fission-based power sources. Their expansion is slow, illogical, and seemingly without a unifying strategic purpose. They are a statistical anomaly, but not a threat. To expend military resources would be a waste of energy. From a darkened alcove, a soft, harmonious chime resonated through the chamber. It was the choral eminence, the gestalt consciousness of the glimmering swarm of Xylos. It appeared not as a single being, but as a swirling cloud of iridescent motes of light, their collective thoughts manifesting as waves of color and sound. "There is a dissonance," the chimes sang, a melody of profound unease. "A silence where there should be noise, a stillness where there should be ambition." Their thoughts do not broadcast on the psychic frequencies. Their emotional spectrum is muted. It is a void, and voids are unnatural, they frighten us. Krog let out a guttural snort, a sound of pure derision. The swarm is frightened by its own shadow. They are primitives. Their minds are too simple to register on your precious frequencies. They are not a void, they are an absence of strength, an absence of will, an absence of glory. He turned his immense head, his multifaceted eyes fixing on Vorn. "High Kalen, your silence is heavier than a dying star. The Signian Ascendancy has always championed decisive action. Speak. Let us put an end to this tedious debate and cleanse the traverse of this infestation." Vorn's gaze did not waver from the human ship. He saw what Krog saw, the lack of particle shields, the simple chemical thrusters, the unadorned hull. He saw what Zil saw, the inefficient energy output, the slow sublight speeds, and he felt what the choral eminence felt, the unsettling quiet. The humans had been broadcasting simple mathematical sequences, prime numbers, the value of pi, the universal greeting of a species seeking peaceful contact. But it was the way they broadcast it. It was a single, repeating loop without variation, without any of the cultural or artistic flourishes that every other species, even the most warlike, embedded in their first messages. It was sterile, patient. It was the message of a fisherman casting a line, waiting in absolute stillness for something to bite. Decisiveness and haste are not the same, War Marshal, Vorn said finally, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded the chamber's attention. We have observed these humans for several of their short generations. They are fractious, prone to internal conflict. Their history is a litany of self-inflicted violence, and yet they endured. They reached for their star and then for the stars beyond. They did so not with a unified purpose, but with a chaotic, desperate energy. Now this vessel appears. It is not a warship. It is not a colony ship. Its designation, according to their own rudimentary public transmissions, is Explorer. An explorer that has parked itself in the most valuable, unspoken military corridor in this quadrant. He let his words hang in the air, the swirling nebulae above seeming to pause in their dance. You see weakness, Krog. I see a contradiction. You see a statistical anomaly, Zil. I see a missing variable. You feel a void eminence. I feel a deliberate and profound silence. To act with brute force is to reveal our own fear of the unknown. To ignore them is to display an arrogance that has toppled empires older than ours. What if this vessel is not a statement of their strength, but a question? What if their presence is not an invasion, but an invitation? Krog's laughter was a terrible sound, an avalanche in a hall of glass. An invitation? An invitation to what? To witness their pathetic attempts at star travel, to marvel at their ability to pollute their own homeworld. They are a disease, Kalen, a fleeting cosmic mistake. The Gorak hegemony formally proposes a motion. A combined fleet of the consensus shall be dispatched to the Orion Traverse. We will issue one warning. If they do not vacate the sector immediately, we will dismantle their vessel, atom by atom, and send the message back to their dirt ball of a planet that this galaxy has gods, and they are not welcome among them. Archivist Zill's prism pulsed with cool blue light. The logic is flawed, but the outcome is predictable. The humans will retreat. The probability of them engaging a consensus fleet is 0.0001%. A demonstration, while energetically wasteful, would reinforce established territorial boundaries. The Kelth will abstain from providing military assets, but will not vote against the motion. The coral eminence's light swirled with agitated violet and gold hues. A warning delivered with a weapon is not a warning. It is a threat. It breeds fear. Fear breeds unpredictable outcomes. We counsel against this. But the momentum was with Krog. The other lesser species of the consensus, swayed by the hegemony's power and the Kelth's cold logic, murmured their assent. The air thickened with a lust for dominance, a collective desire to reaffirm their place at the apex of galactic life. The humans were an easy target, a way to forge unity through shared contempt. Vorn saw the path unfolding before them, a dark and treacherous road paved with hubris. He knew a vote would be a mere formality. He was the most respected voice, but even he could not hold back a tide of fear masquerading as strength. He raised a hand, the gesture silencing the chamber once more. Let the records show that the Cygnian ascendancy votes against this motion. We do not fear the humans, War Marshal. We fear what we do not know, and we know nothing of their true nature. You mistake their simple tools for a simple mind. It is a classic and often fatal miscalculation. You seek to make a statement to them, but I fear the statement you will receive in return will be one you are not prepared for. Krog's mandible-like jaws clenched in a predator's grin. Let the records also show that the Gorak hegemony is not afraid of the whispers of primitives. The motion is carried. The holographic sphere at the center of the chamber shimmered, the image of the lone human vessel replaced by fleet trajectories, power allocations, and tactical deployments. A force of overwhelming power, a collection of the most formidable ships from the Gorak, the Hivites, and the Centaurian kingdoms, was being assembled. It was a fleet capable of pacifying a star system, and it was being sent to intimidate a single primitive ship. It was, Vorn thought with a profound and sinking dread, the grandest act of cosmic bullying he had ever witnessed. And as the War Marshal laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound that echoed off the crystalline spires, Vorn felt a deep certainty that the laughter would not last. The universe maintained a balance, and a pride so vast and baseless was always, eventually, met with a fall of equal measure. He watched the fleet icons converge on the Orion Traverse, a spear aimed at the heart of a mystery, and he prayed they would not be shattered upon it. The journey to the Orion Traverse was, for the consensus fleet, a victory parade before a battle that would never be fought. War Marshal Krog stood on the command deck of his flagship, the World Breaker, a vessel whose very name was a promise of violence. Its obsidian hull was jagged and menacing, designed to inspire terror. All around it, the rest of the fleet moved in perfect, brutalist formation, a swarm of predators closing in on a single, lost piece of prey. Krog watched the tactical display, a sneer plastered across his rocky features. He saw the lone human vessel, a tiny speck of unresolved light, holding its position as if in blissful ignorance of the apocalypse bearing down upon it. Pathetic. Kalen Vorn observed from his own vessel, the Cygnian cruiser Stellaris, which trailed the main fleet at a respectful distance. He had insisted on accompanying the expedition as an observer, a decision that had earned him another round of Krog's derisive laughter. But Vorn was not here to watch a battle. He was here to witness a consequence. His bridge was a place of serene order, its crew moving with the silent, fluid grace of their people. They monitored the human ship, their sensors peeling back its layers. The reports were unchanging, maddeningly consistent. Minimal energy output, no shield fluctuations, no weapon ports detected, no increase in engine temperature. It simply floated there, broadcasting its sequence of prime numbers into the void, a metronome counting down to its own oblivion. War Marshal Krog is opening a channel to the human vessel, a communications officer reported, his voice as smooth and calm as polished river stone. On Vorn's main view screen, the image of the human ship grew larger, its functional, unadorned hull filling the frame. Then Krog's voice erupted from the speakers, amplified and distorted with aggressive confidence. Unidentified vessel of the human species. This is War Marshal Krog of the Consensus Hegemony Fleet. You have trespassed in a restricted military zone. Your presence is unauthorized. You are ordered to power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply, your vessel will be immediately and irrevocably destroyed. You have one of your minutes to respond. The silence that followed was absolute. The entire Consensus fleet, a collection of some of the most powerful military hardware in the galaxy, held its collective breath. Vorn watched the human ship, every fiber of his being focused on it, searching for any sign of panic. A flicker of engine static, a desperate surge of power to a shield that did not exist, a garbled, terrified transmission. There was nothing. The ship remained perfectly still. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Vorn could feel Krog's impatience mounting across the void, a palpable wave of frustration and bloodlust. The Gorok were not known for their patience. Just as the minute was about to expire, a new signal emanated from the human ship. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea. It was a calm, modulated voice, speaking flawless, unaccented Cygnian, the lingua franca of the Consensus. The linguistic feat alone was staggering. It implied a level of data interception and analysis far beyond what their technology should have allowed. "This is Ambassador Evelyn Reed of the United Human Systems Vessel Odyssey," the voice said. It was female, steady, and utterly devoid of fear. It was the voice of someone reporting the weather, not someone staring down the barrels of a fleet. "We acknowledge your transmission, War Marshal Krog. We mean you no harm. We are here on a mission of peaceful exploration and observation." Krog's reply was a roar of disbelief and fury. "Observation? Do you take me for a fool? You sit in the most strategic gateway in this sector and call it observation. Your time is up, human. Power down your pathetic excuse for a ship, or I will turn it into a cloud of incandescent gas." The response from Ambassador Reed came without a moment's hesitation, as if she were consulting a script. "We cannot comply with that request, War Marshal. Our mission here is of critical importance. However, we have no desire for conflict. We ask that you hold your position and allow us to explain our purpose. We believe it is in the mutual interest of all species present." This was the moment that would define the encounter. To Vorn, the human's calm was more terrifying than any weapon. It was the calm of absolute certainty. It was not the bluff of a cornered animal. It was the patience of a monolith. Krog, however, only saw insolence. His rage boiled over. "Mutual interest? The only interest I have is in vaporizing your arrogant little craft. You dare to defy the will of the Consensus. You dare to lecture me on your purpose. This is your final warning, human, final." On the tactical display, Vorn saw the energy signatures of the World Breaker's primary cannons begin to spike. The Gorok flagship was preparing to fire. The air on the Stellaris bridge grew tense. Vorn's officers looked to him, their composed expressions betraying a sliver of apprehension. "Kalen," his first officer murmured, "they are committing to an act of unprovoked aggression." "I see it," Vorn replied, his own voice a low whisper. He did not take his eyes off the Odyssey. It still had not moved. It had not powered a single defensive system. It was either the most profound act of suicidal foolishness or the most sublime act of confidence in galactic history. The human ambassador's voice came again, still impossibly serene. We understand your position, War Marshal. We regret that you have chosen this course of action. We hoped for a more reasoned dialogue. It seems, however, that a demonstration is required." Krog laughed, a short, sharp bark of contempt. "A demonstration? What will you demonstrate? The velocity at which your hull disintegrates." "No," Ambassador Reed replied, and for the first time Vorn detected a subtle shift in her tone. It was not fear, it was something far stranger. It was a note of profound, almost weary solemnity. "A demonstration of why we are here, of why our silence was not a sign of weakness, but of respect for the forces we are observing. We are ready to share our purpose. Please stand by for a full spectrum broadcast." And then it happened. It did not begin with a flash of light or an explosion of energy. It began with a distortion. The space directly behind the small human ship, the empty void that stretched out towards a distant star, began to shimmer. It was as if the fabric of spacetime itself were becoming unstable, like heat haze rising from a desert floor. Vorn's sensor officers began shouting reports, their professional comm finally cracking under the strain of impossible data. "Kalen, massive gravitational anomaly forming. It's localized. The source is unknown. Energy readings are off the scale. Not weapons fire, not engine output, it's something else. A state change energy, it's stable. Spacetime is warping. The light from the background stars is bending around something immense." Krog on the open channel was momentarily stunned into silence. What is this? Some kind of light show? A pathetic parlor trick? But it was no trick. The shimmering intensified, coalescing into a field of pure blackness, a hole in the universe that swallowed the light of the stars behind it. It was a cloaking field, but on a scale that defied all known physics. It was not merely hiding a ship from view. It was hiding a section of reality. Then, with a slow, silent, majestic grace that was the antithesis of all the brute force the consensus fleet represented, the field dissolved. And the galaxy held its breath. Where there had been empty space, there was now a ship. To call it a ship was an insult to the sheer scale of the thing. It was a mobile celestial body. It dwarfed the world breaker and the entire consensus fleet combined, reducing them to insignificant specks of dust. Its length was not measured in meters, but in fractions of an astronomical unit. But it was the design that struck Vorn with the force of a physical blow. It was not a warship. It was not angular or menacing like a Gorok vessel, nor sleek and elegant like a Cygnian cruiser. It was smooth, organic, and ancient. Its hull seemed to be made of a pearlescent material that swirled with captured starlight, and it was covered not in weapon emplacements, but in vast, continent-sized domes of transparent crystal, through which entire ecosystems could be faintly seen: forests, oceans, mountain ranges. Its energy signature, now fully revealed, was that of a small star, yet it was controlled, contained, and utterly passive. It was not a weapon. It was an ark, a sanctuary, a world unto itself. The laughter had stopped. Across the entire fleet, a silence fell, a profound, heart-stopping awe mixed with a primal, instinctual terror. This was a creation of a god, not a race of squabbling primitives from a muddy planet. Krog's flagship, the World Breaker, looked like a child's toy next to a mountain. The Gorok War Marshal was completely silent, the open channel broadcasting only the sound of his suddenly ragged breathing. He had brought a fleet to threaten a god, and he was only now realizing the depth of his blasphemy. Into this monumental silence, Ambassador Reed's voice returned, as calm and measured as ever, but now imbued with the infinite gravity of the vessel that loomed behind her. "This is the human Arkship Vigil. For 10,000 of your years, we have traversed the dark spaces between the stars, observing, listening, and remembering. We are not explorers in the way you understand it. We are not conquerors. We are custodians." Vorn sank back into his command chair, his mind reeling. The contradiction was solved. The missing variable was found. The void was filled. The humans were not a young race fumbling their way into the galaxy. They were an old soul, an ancient consciousness that had chosen a different path. While the consensus squabbled over territory and resources, while they built their grand fleets and polished their thrones, humanity had been engaged in a task so vast, so profound, that it humbled every achievement of his own proud people. Custodians of what? Vorn whispered to himself, though the question was a prayer aimed at the stars. As if hearing his thought across the void, Ambassador Reed continued, her voice now a broadcast to the entire stunned fleet. "We are the custodians of life, not just our own. We found them, you see, the echoes, the ghosts, in the silent ruins of 100 dead worlds, on the drifting hulks of ships that had been dead for 1,000,000 years. We found the remnants of civilizations that rose, fell, and vanished without a trace. The Kuruk, the Lumina, the machine minds of Cygnus X1. Species that were, by all accounts, more advanced than any in your consensus. And they were all gone, wiped out by a force they could not understand or fight. On the main screen of the Stellaris, beside the breathtaking image of the Vigil, a new set of data began to appear. Star charts, temporal graphs, energy decay signatures. It was the evidence. A chilling pattern repeating itself every 50 million years, a wave of extinction that swept through the galaxy, erasing all advanced organic and synthetic life in its path. A great filter. Not a theory, but a documented, recurring event. Your consensus believes itself to be the apex of galactic life, the ambassador's voice continued, a somber and pitying tone entering her words. But you are merely the current growth of flora in a garden that is periodically and violently weeded. You are an iteration. We discovered this truth early in our expansion. We saw the two paths ahead of us, to build an empire on a foundation of sand, destined to be washed away by the coming tide, or to build a lifeboat. To preserve the memory and the spark of life itself, so that when the wave passed, the garden would not be entirely barren. The scale of it was incomprehensible, the sheer, soul-crushing weight of their purpose. They had not been silent out of weakness, they had been silent out of focus. They had not built warships because they knew the real enemy could not be fought with cannons and torpedoes. They had built an ark. They had sacrificed their own ambition for galactic dominance for a higher, sacred duty. We came to the Orion Traverse because our long-range sensors detected a precursor to the next wave, Reed explained. A specific neutrino frequency, a gravitational resonance that matches the final records of the last fallen civilizations. It is beginning again, and it is beginning here. We did not come here to claim this territory. We came here to observe the end. We had hoped to do so without being noticed. We had hoped you would not force our hand. A low, keening chime resonated from the speaker on Vorn's command chair. It was the choral eminence, its collective consciousness broadcasting directly to him from their distant world. We felt it, the swarm's thoughts sang, a melody of dawning horror and understanding. The silence, the void, it was not theirs. It was the echo of all the voices that are gone, the emptiness they were watching. On the open channel, there was still only the sound of Krog's breathing. The war marshal who had roared and threatened and laughed was broken. His worldview, built on the simple principle that might makes right, had been shattered into a billion pieces. He was a child who had been throwing rocks at the moon, only to have the moon turn and look at him. Vorn finally found his voice. He stood, his form ramrod straight, and addressed his communications officer. Open a channel to the human ambassador, all frequencies, unencrypted. Kalen, his first officer, began, a note of caution in his voice. Do it, Vorn commanded. A moment later, the officer nodded. Channel open, High Kalen. Vorn stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the tiny speck of the Odyssey, now utterly dwarfed by the magnificent, terrible truth floating behind it. He spoke, and his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of his entire civilization, the dawning humility of a being who had just looked into the face of true wisdom. Ambassador Evelyn Reed, he said, the name feeling foreign and momentous on his tongue. This is High Kalen Vorn of the Cygnian Ascendancy. On behalf of my people, and I suspect, soon on behalf of the entire consensus, I believe we have made a grave and profound error. The response was immediate, and still, after everything, impossibly calm. We understand, High Kalen Vorn. The first step to surviving the storm is to acknowledge that it is coming. We are glad you are finally looking at the sky. The aftermath in the sanctum of the consensus was not one of anger or recrimination, but of a deep, abiding shock that had settled into the very crystalline structure of the chamber. The representatives moved and spoke as if in a dream, their former arrogance replaced by a humbling bewilderment. The grand holographic sphere no longer showed tactical deployments, but the data the humans had provided, the cyclical extinction patterns, the energy signatures of the fallen, the slow, inexorable advance of the precursor signals from the void beyond the galactic rim. The laughter of War Marshal Krog was a distant, shameful memory, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a form of prayer. Krog himself was absent, having been recalled by his hegemony in disgrace. His entire fleet now held at the edge of the Orion Traverse, awaiting new orders from a government that was suddenly adrift in a sea of terrifying new truths. High Kalen Vorn stood where he had stood before, but he was a changed being. He saw the chamber not as a throne of power, but as a fragile bubble of ignorance that had just been burst. He had requested, and been granted, a direct audience with the human ambassador. She was not appearing in person. The humans, it seemed, were still observing strict quarantine and operational protocols. But her image would be broadcast into the sanctum, a lone human voice addressing the collected might of the galaxy's oldest ruling body. The anticipation was a physical force, a pressure in the air that made it difficult to breathe. The sphere at the center of the chamber flickered, and the star charts vanished, replaced by a simple, two-dimensional image of a human face. It was Ambassador Evelyn Reed. Her appearance was as unremarkable as her vessel had first seemed. She was of average height and build for her species, her hair pulled back from a face that was neither young nor old, etched with lines of thought and patience rather than age. Her eyes, however, were ancient. They held the same weight, the same depth, as the star-filled abyss her people had been watching for millennia. She wore a simple, dark uniform, devoid of rank or ornamentation. In a hall defined by ostentatious displays of power, her simplicity was the most powerful statement of all. "Representatives of the consensus," she began, her voice calm and clear, echoing in the vast chamber. "I am Ambassador Evelyn Reed. I speak for the United Human Systems and for the mission of the Archship Vigil." No one moved. Every eye, from Vorn's slitted pupils to the crystalline lens of Archivist Zill, was fixed on her. The coral eminence's light pulsed in a slow, respectful rhythm of soft, incandescent blue. "For generations," Reed continued, "we have watched you. We have studied your histories, your cultures, your endless cycles of conflict and cooperation. We have seen great empires rise from the dust and witnessed their inevitable decline. In you we saw ourselves. We saw our own past, the same territorial instincts, the same pride, the same blindness to the larger cosmic truths that govern our shared existence. It is the curse of sentient life to focus on the squabbles of the day, rather than the encroaching twilight of ages." Her gaze seemed to sweep across the chamber, meeting each representative's stare. "You built fleets to fight one another. We built an ark to save one another. You sought to conquer planets. We sought to preserve the memories of the planets that had already been lost. You measured your strength in weapons. We measured ours in the number of species whose songs we could save from eternal silence. These are not criticisms. They are merely observations. It is the path you chose, just as we chose ours." Archivist Zill's prism flared with light, its synthesized voice cutting through the ambassador's calm speech. "Your data has been analyzed. The patterns are undeniable. The cyclical nature of the extinction events is a statistical certainty. However, the cause remains an unknown variable. You have observed this phenomenon, but you do not understand its source." Ambassador Reed gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That is correct, Archivist. We have theories. A self-replicating nanite swarm from another galaxy, a form of life that exists in a higher dimension, culling the lower planes like a farmer clearing a field. A natural cosmic pulse of exotic radiation. We have 1,000 theories and no conclusive evidence. The only thing we know for certain is that it scours all advanced technological life from the galaxy, and then it recedes. We do not know why. We only know that it is as inevitable as the death of a star." A wave of despair washed over the chamber. The hope that the humans, with their vast knowledge, held the key to defeating the threat evaporated. They were not saviors with a secret weapon. They were librarians, cataloging the books of a library they knew was scheduled for demolition. It was Vorn who spoke next, his voice resonating with a newfound purpose. He stepped forward, his obsidian scales catching the light of the swirling nebulae above. "You speak of preservation, Ambassador. You have built a lifeboat, but what of those of us who are still standing on the shore? You have watched us for thousands of years. You have judged us, and you have found us wanting. You chose to save the memory of life, but not life itself. Why reveal yourselves now? Why not remain hidden, as you have for so long, and simply watch us die?" It was the question that hung in the heart of every being present. It was an accusation and a plea in one. Ambassador Reed's expression softened, a flicker of something deeply emotional passing through her ancient eyes. "Because you are the first," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the sanctum. "In all our millennia of observation, you are the first iteration of galactic life to form a stable, multi-species coalition. The empires before you were monolithic, rising and falling alone. They consumed their neighbors or were consumed by them. They were islands. But you built bridges. Flawed bridges, certainly. Bridges built on fear and dominance as much as cooperation. But bridges, nonetheless. You formed a consensus. You created a forum where a Gorok warrior, a Signian philosopher, a Kelth archivist, and a Xylos collective could speak with one voice, however dissonant." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We did not believe it was possible. Our models predicted your coalition would collapse under the weight of its own internal conflicts within a few centuries. But it has endured. It has grown. You are something new, and so, for the first time, we allowed ourselves a sliver of something we had long since abandoned. Hope. Hope that this cycle might be different. Hope that a united galaxy might be able to do what 1,000 solitary empires could not. The air in the chamber shifted. Despair was replaced by a fragile, terrifying spark. Hope. It was a more dangerous emotion than fear. We did not reveal ourselves to save you, Reed stated, her voice regaining its formal tone. Humanity cannot save you. The vigil is not a weapon. Its purpose is sacred and cannot be risked in a direct confrontation with a force we do not understand. We revealed ourselves to give you a choice. The choice to die as squabbling children, fighting for scraps of dirt as the heavens fall, or the choice to stand together, to face the twilight as one, and to forge a legacy that will echo beyond the end. Even if you fail, your unity will be a song worth preserving. A testament that, for a brief, shining moment, the life of this galaxy set aside its differences to face the dark. Vorn felt a fire ignite within him, a purpose he had not felt since his youth. The petty politics, the endless posturing for position and power, it all seemed like a faded memory from another life. Here was a cause worthy of the Cygnian ascendancy's long history. Here was a truth that eclipsed all others. He turned to face the other representatives, his filament crest flaring with conviction. For centuries, the consensus has been a tool for maintaining the status quo, for preserving our individual sovereignties while projecting an illusion of unity. We have used it to intimidate nascent powers, to regulate trade routes, to mediate border disputes. We have treated galactic peace as the absence of war among ourselves. Today, we learn that peace was merely the silence of the graveyard into which we were all marching. He gestured to the image of Ambassador Reed. The humans have given us the greatest gift and the most terrible burden. They have given us the truth. We can no longer afford the luxury of our old hatreds. The Gorok lust for conquest, the Kelth obsession with sterile data, even my own people's pride in our long and unbroken heritage. These are all vanities. They are chains that bind us to a fate that has been written for us 100 times before. He looked at the shimmering cloud of the coral eminence. You felt the void. We all did in our own ways. We simply chose to fill it with noise. The time for noise is over. The time for a true consensus is upon us. He turned back to the human ambassador, his gaze unwavering. Ambassador Reed, your people chose the path of the custodian, a noble if lonely path. But you were wrong about one thing. You say you cannot save us. But by giving us this truth, by showing us the real enemy, you have already given us the only weapon that might matter. You have given us a reason to unite, not in fear, but in shared purpose. We will not ask you to fight our battle for us. The vigil must be preserved. But we will ask for your knowledge, your data, everything you have learned from the ghosts of the galaxy. Help us understand what we are facing. Stand with us not as saviors, but as allies, as equals. A long silence followed his speech. Vorn had laid his entire political and personal capital on the table. He had challenged the core identities of every species in the room. He watched as the Kelth prism pulsed with rapid, calculating light. He saw the coral eminence swirl into a bright, resolute gold. He did not know what the Gorok would do, their representative a low-ranking diplomat sent to replace the disgraced Krog, but he did not care. The tide had turned. Then Ambassador Reed's image smiled. It was a small, tired, but genuine smile, and it transformed her face. The ancient weight in her eyes lifted for just a moment, replaced by a light that Vorn could only identify as relief. That Hykalan Vorn, she said softly, is the response we have been waiting for 10,000 years. And so the great project began. The alliance of sentient life, forged from the dying embers of the consensus, was born. The Orion Traverse, once a point of contention, became its headquarters, a neutral ground where the greatest minds of a dozen species came together. The human ship Odyssey remained, a quiet and constant presence, while the great Arcship Vigil stayed, cloaked in the void nearby, a silent partner in the endeavor. It began to share its vast archives, a torrent of data that was both illuminating and terrifying. They learned of the architectural signatures of the Lumina, the quantum computing of the machine minds, the biological artistry of the Kuruk, and they learned how each of them died. The Alliance fleets were repurposed. No longer were they instruments of conquest and intimidation. They were now tools of research and defense. They patrolled the galactic rim, deploying countless deep space sensors, probes designed by Kelth logic, built with Gorok durability and guided by Cygnian strategic wisdom. They were hunting for ghosts, searching for any clue, any hint of the nature of the approaching threat. The mood was somber, but it was not one of despair. It was one of grim determination. For the first time in their collective history, they had a common enemy, an enemy that was not born of misunderstanding or conflicting interests, but was a fundamental force of the cosmos. Vorn found himself working closely with Evelyn Reed. They spoke for hours on end, not as representatives, but as individuals, sharing the philosophies of their people. He learned of humanity's tumultuous history, their capacity for both great cruelty and breathtaking compassion. He learned that their decision to build the vigil was not a unanimous one. It had been born from a century of bloody debate after they first discovered the galactic extinction pattern. They called it the Great Choice. To abandon personal ambition for the sake of a collective memory. He found their solution both profound and tragic. They had surrendered their own future to become the curators of everyone else's past. "We never saw ourselves as gods, Kalen," Reed explained to him one cycle, her voice tinged with the weariness of her long duty. "We saw ourselves as librarians, the last librarians in a world where everyone else had forgotten how to read, tasked with saving the books from a fire we could not extinguish." "But now," Vorn countered, his gaze on the swirling star map that now highlighted the approaching precursor signal, "you have found others who are willing to learn to read again. You are no longer alone in your library." Her smile was his reward. It was in that moment of quiet camaraderie that the final piece of the puzzle arrived. A priority message, flashed from the deepest sensor array on the galactic rim, a device that incorporated human, Kelth, and Signian technology. It was a breakthrough. They gathered in the primary strategy room aboard the Stellaris, now the flagship of the Alliance. Vorn, Reed, Archivist Zill, and the new Gorok War Marshal, a thoughtful and battle-scarred veteran named Grak, stood before the holographic display. The data streamed in, raw and chaotic at first, then slowly resolved by the Kelth analysis engines into something coherent. "The precursor signal is not random noise," Zill's voice rasped, the prism glowing with intense computational light. "It contains a complex, repeating mathematical structure. It is not a natural phenomenon. It is artificial. It is a message." A cold dread settled over the room. "A message," Grak grunted, his powerful form tense. "What does it say?" "We are still deciphering the core language," Zill replied. "But certain elements are universal. There is a countdown. Based on our preliminary models, it will reach zero in approximately 500 standard years." 500 years. A heartbeat for a Signian, but a terrifyingly short amount of time to prepare for a galactic apocalypse. But there was something else. "There is more," Reed said, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she read the flowing data streams on a secondary screen. "The signal is not just a broadcast, it's a carrier wave. There's something embedded within it, something very, very old. Zill, can you isolate the subharmonic frequencies?" The Kelth archivist processed the request. The main signal on the display was filtered, and a faint, almost ethereal pattern emerged from within the noise. It was not a message, it was a map. A map of a single point located far outside the galaxy in the absolute crushing emptiness of intergalactic space. And from that point a line was drawn, aimed directly at the center of their own galaxy. It was the path of the enemy. "It's a warning," Vorn breathed, the realization dawning on him. "The precursor signal isn't from the threat itself. It's a warning about the threat. Someone or something sent it." "The energy signature of the embedded signal is ancient," Zill stated, its voice filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "The decay rate suggests an age of over 1 billion years. It predates any known life in this galaxy. It may predate the galaxy itself." They were looking at a message from a civilization so old it was beyond comprehension, a message sent across impossible gulfs of time and space. A warning left by the victims of a previous cycle, or something else entirely. And then, as the final layers of encryption on the ancient signal were peeled away by the combined intellect of their alliance, the true message was revealed. It was not complex. It consisted of only 2 concepts, translated into the base mathematical language that was the foundation of all science. The first concept was, "They are coming." The second concept was, "We are running." And with it a final piece of data, a single image reconstructed from the signal. It was not of a ship or a creature or a weapon. It was an image of another galaxy, a galaxy that was completely, utterly dark. Every star had been extinguished. Every sun had been snuffed out. It was a galaxy of black cinders, a cosmic tombstone on a scale that shattered the mind. The threat wasn't just a wave of extinction that passed through. It was a force that consumed everything. It didn't just weed the garden, it salted the earth and poisoned the sky. Evelyn Reed stared at the image of the dead galaxy, her face pale, the calm she had maintained for so long finally cracking. "My God," she whispered. "We built a lifeboat when what we needed was an escape route." Vorn looked from the image of the dead galaxy to the map pointing towards their own. He looked at the faces of his new allies, the human, the Gorok, the Kelth. The fear was real, a cold, sharp thing. But beneath it was something else, something forged in the revelation of the vigil and tempered in the unity of the Alliance. It was resolve. The humans had prepared for the end of a cycle. The consensus had prepared for nothing at all. Now, together, the Alliance had to prepare for something far worse. The end of everything. Their enemy was not a galactic force. It was a universal one, and it was on its way. He looked at Reed, at the librarian who had been forced to leave her library and face the fire. He saw in her eyes the same iron will he felt in his own heart. The galaxy would never forget the day the human warship Uncloaked, not because of the power it displayed, but because of the terrible, unifying truth it had revealed. Their laughter had been the laughter of blissful ignorance. What came next would be the struggle of enlightened existence against absolute oblivion. And for the first time in a billion years, the galaxy would not face it alone.